I'd like my father, Bern, to be remembered as a great man, as a great father, as a great businessman, but most of all, as a photographer.
It was portraiture of people that really energized him. The opportunity to relate to people and to get to know them, these most accomplished people. My dad was interested in doing visual biographies, and so many of them actually have a connection with Oxford.
Bern Schwartz was a man who really liked photography. He spent his life as a businessman in manufacturing and textiles and plastics. He owned an organ and piano company, and then retired and decided to spend his time with his wife, Ronny Schwartz, making photographic portraits, and then poured himself into making them over the next 4 years, photographing politicians and celebrities and royalty and figure skaters and artists and writers. And he left this archive of really quite startling depth.
Bern Schwartz embarked on a second career at the age of 60 and had resounding success. The portraits of some of the most iconic figures of the 1970s provide a fascinating look into the past. Several of the UK sitters have their papers here at the Bodleian, so that provides a wonderful contextual relationship for the archive. Richard Avedon was really the catalyst behind the archive going to the Bodleian. He was incredibly enthusiastic about the archive, and not just the selected prints, but actually the entire archive.
We're so grateful to the Bern Schwartz Family Foundation for their investment in the Bodleian, but in placing the family archive, the archive of Bern Schwartz, and to some extent the archive of Bern and Ronny Schwartz's, their collaboration in photography. And so the fact that that's come here to add to the Bodleian's collection, to be a kind of transformative moment, is so wonderful for us. We want to be able to use the Bern Schwartz archive to support all sorts of programs, and that will take many forms over the years to come. But that first most important task is to catalogue it, to make sure that the world knows what riches are in that collection.
We have the finished photographs, but we also have the negatives, his kind of proof prints where he was making notes and marking them up and telling himself where to crop things. We have the notes that his wife Ronny made after each of the sittings that describe exactly what happened, how a person was, what did Bern do in order to get a portrait out of them.
He built a relationship with these people. He studied them beforehand, had a full-time librarian, there was no internet, to be able to research. And because of his background in business all those years, he was able to elicit a sympathetic reaction from the sitter that some photographer coming in off the street might not be able to do.
There are other collections of portraits out there, but there are very few archives that have this amount of detail about the creation of the work.
He had a dictating machine and he dictated his notes, and over the course of all of the portraits is hundreds of pages. My mother was very organized, and she wrote a lot of the correspondence with the different sitters. And these developed into very important relationships as well.
This is an archive of portraits, but it's an archive about portraiture, about how you create an image of a person. A person is a really rich and complicated thing. We have lives that are full of all kinds of stuff, especially if you are a professional figure skater or a prime minister or a prince. And Bern managed to condense all of that into a portrait that would create a readable message that would communicate something about his sitter. And the way that he does that is the story of this archive. And through that, you get to see what Bern is doing. He's not asking people to pose.
Bern would click the shutter at sort of moments where the sitter was very relaxed, very off guard. They were having a conversation. And so that sort of candid nature of the images that Bern took brings those sitters really to life. It kind of reveals something about their inner character.
His goal was to have them forget they were being photographed. Alistair Cook mentioned it was like having a conversation with a friend. And a lot of these sitters actually did become friends. Most unlikely, Bern being a dropout from Lehigh University, sitting down with Lord Mountbatten and spending hours with him. He said, well, I'd like you to photograph people I'm related to. Well, they happen to be kings and queens. A very important photograph in terms of his career, and that was the opportunity to photograph King Charles, who was 29-year-old Prince of Wales at the time. They got to talking about Philippe Halsman and how Bern had photographed people jumping. King Charles turned to him. He said, you're not going to ask me to jump, are you? And Bern said, no, I'm not.
It's quite often a negotiation between the person who's having their portrait taken, normally because they are people who are used to being successful. They have very clear ideas about what they want their portrait to be like. They have a very clear sense of managing their own media image. Think about photographing Margaret Thatcher. If you are a photographer and her and her entourage come in the room and she demands, as she did, to take a photograph that will win her the election. Now, can you imagine, faced with Thatcher, what do you do in that situation? How do you get her to relax enough so you can get something so that she looks like a normal person? And these are all answered in the archive. If you read the notes on Thatcher, you'll see the kind of things that Bern said to her. What did they talk about? He drew her into a conversation about Labour politics, and she had very clear opinions on that. And this got her animated in a different way, and it made her approachable, that made her look powerful, that made her look competent, all the things that she wanted. And then this photograph did go onto a Conservative Party campaign poster, and it did win her the election. And if you come to the Bodleian and come to the Conservative Party archive, which we also have here, you can see where that leads. And this, to me, this is what the importance of the archive is. It's an archive of how images get made. And then through the rest of our archives, you can see where those images go.
If I were to pick my one favorite, most memorable piece, it would be the picture of Angela Rippon jumping through the air. She was, of course, a newsreader, but studied ballet, loved ballet, and my father had learned this technique of jumping pictures from Philippe Halsman. This picture was on the front of the London Times magazine section, and my sister-in-law, future sister-in-law, saw the picture, told Christine, my future wife, you have to go to this exhibit. And I was there, we met, so I will forever, in my heart, be thankful for that picture of Angela Rippon.
Another photograph that Bern felt very strongly about, and he regarded as one of his best photographs, was the former Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir. And he arrived at her office, and her assistant said, now she has about 15 minutes that she can spend with you. So he had prepared himself well, and he sat down with Golda Meir, and one of the first things she said was, talked about how much she disliked sitting for portraits, sitting for sculptures, being photographed, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I understand that. But they went beyond that, and they started talking about her life. 15 minutes went by, 30 minutes went by, an hour and 15 minutes went by. And finally, it was Bern who said to her, I've taken all the photographs I can. She gave him a big hug and kiss. She said, "I'd love to see you when you return to Israel next time," which he did.
My favorite piece in the collection has to be the portrait of David Hockney. The portrait shows David Hockney in the presence of two of his most iconic images. We see him leaning on the canvas of My Parents, which is in the Tate Gallery. We learn from Bern that it was actually his third attempt at depicting his parents, and his father had grown slightly fatigued of waiting around for him. So instead of depicting him frontally as he showed his mother, he decided to show him in profile as he was reading a book, which was kind of very aptly called Art and Photography. If we look at the contact sheets, we see that David Hockney was originally depicted standing up in full view, but in the editing process, Bern decided to only show David next to the father. And I'd like to think that perhaps he was quite moved by the story that the father had this kind of connection with David. To the right, in the background of the picture, is another very famous picture, and it's David Hockney drawing at a table, and it's a painting that's now in the Ludwig Foundation in Vienna. And in that portrait, David Hockney is sitting at a drafting table drawing, and he's wearing a striped jumper, a rugby shirt, green and blue striped.
So when Bern asks Hockney to wear the same jumper that he has on in the painting, and Hockney has to go to the laundry basket to get it out, and it's all creased. And Hockney never wears creased clothes, and this is him in a kind of struggle with Bern. But then, of course, Bern is also feeding off Hockney. Bern Schwartz doesn't normally take portraits like this. He's taken a portrait that mirrors a Hockney painting with a figure and then a frame within the frame. And this is the two of them working out kind of what kind of an image would be appropriate for a professional image maker like David Hockney.
There's an expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but a story is worth 1,000 pictures. And the documentary archive tells the story and is quite interesting and fits into the context that scholars at Oxford might enjoy and find useful.
If you think about photography, it's been one of the most important innovations in the way that we share ideas since William Henry Fox Talbot and Louis Daguerre in the 1830s came up with their parallel inventions of this new art and craft. And I think it's time for the university and for the library to be more directed in the way that it collects, teaches students, that it supports scholars, and that it shares with the public this absolutely compelling, this completely transformational technology in the way that visual ideas have been shared.
I do hope that students and future generations will engage with the material and use all this wonderful ephemeral supporting notes, the sitting notes, the diary entries. These very rich materials will even be brought to further light to gain insight into this wonderful period of the late 1970s.
We're going to collect new archives by amazing photographers. We want work that reflects every facet of life in this country, and it's going to be our mission to really drive research in this area.